Welcome to BizTech's Apex Cybersecurity Show, the show that's all about helping businesses across the region better equip themselves to understand the cybersecurity landscape better. Now, today we feature Scott Jarkoff. He's the Director of Intelligence Strategy, APJ, and Meta at CrowdStrike. Now, to tell us more, Scott, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me. Glad to be
Now,
here.
Scott, for a start, give us an overview of CrowdStrike and your role in the company.
So CrowdStrike is kind of AI machine learning based endpoint detection and response company. Like we're most famously known for endpoint protection, but we are completely underpinned by threat intelligence. And then for me, my role within the company is to look after the threat intelligence business across the Asia Pacific Japan region, as well as the Middle East region, Middle East, Turkey, and Africa. So basically that entire geography there. So yeah, I have a pretty big remit in terms of geographical landscape and all focused on the intel side of the house.
Okay, so now with your wide remit, tell us now, focusing on the Asia Pacific region, what are the key cybersecurity threats that concern you as an organization and also CIOs across the region most?
I mean, I think I'd be remiss in not starting this by saying, ransomware. Ransomware and extortion is without a doubt the most pervasive, you know, threat these days. And like I'd say also, as pervasive as ransomware is, we're starting to see certain actors actually move away from ransomware and just stick with extortion. So what I mean by that is once they've breached a network, instead of dropping ransomware, they're going to exfiltrate the data and then they're just going to pressure the company through an extortion campaign to try and get the company to pay. No need to lock up the data with ransomware. No need to disrupt operations. They know they're going to get paid just under the threat of releasing that data, because generally that data is going to have, some work products, something potentially legal liability, reputational hits if it gets released. So that's probably the biggest threat. I'd say the second biggest threat would probably be espionage from the intellectual property espionage type of the house. And then I'd also probably supplement these first two because it's interesting that I started with financially motivated crime, went over to nation state because that's who does, the espionage. Then for the third, I'd say it's like a nexus of the two, where you have a nation state that's very focused on trying to generate currency in some form or fashion. So those are probably the three biggest threats. And then e-crime in particular, though, I'd supplement this by saying they're getting extremely sophisticated. Let's not think of e-crime adversaries like we did in the past. Like, this is I guess, to use a old phrase to show my American side of the house, even though I haven't been there forever. Um, this is not your mother's old e-crime gang. It's like, it's not simple attacks. These guys are highly sophisticated. And what we call breakout time, this is like the time that it takes an adversary to walk in the front door and then go from the front door to, say, the bedroom where the jewelry is hiding. So initial access to that first lateral movement, we call this breakout time. E-crime, it was 84 minutes in 2022. In 2023, it's down to 79 minutes. So 5 minutes quicker. And we've seen e-crime adversaries operate as fast as 7 minutes breakout time. So e-crime adversary sophistication is skyrocketing and speed is changing drastically.
And that is amazing, isn't it? And you're harking to historical times and historical days. And while you were saying that, I was thinking back to that show War Games with the single hacker hacking into the defense computers, and that's what most people think about. But what you've identified in terms of the three and four key ways that adversaries are working, it's basically organized crime and state-sponsored crime now, isn't it? And it's sophisticated.
That's it. Absolutely. It's no more of this, putting a phone on a modem like, in the movie War Games and, shall we play a game? No, none of that. That's all that, I mean, that was cute. It was fun. I love the movie. But yeah, that's not what we're seeing these days. We're seeing highly sophisticated threat actors targeting businesses all across the globe, but yeah, very specifically here in the region. And it's tough. These guys are very, very sophisticated.
Okay, now as you said, access times are dropping dramatically. So how prepared are companies in the Asia Pacific region, particularly in the technology, financial services, telecommunication space? How prepared are they? Because they are the big targets compared to their global peers.
Sure. I'd say it depends, right? Financial services tends to be much more prepared for obvious reasons, right? Like they have to protect the money. And there's a lot of risk there, right? If they let adversaries into their networks, and then the potential of, say, like the Bangladeshi Swift attack from years past. We don't want to see anything like that anymore. Those are huge incidents. And so yeah, the financial industry is, generally speaking, ahead of the power curve. They're also, generally speaking, Intel consumers. Technology, on the other hand, and telco, it ranges. Like, when we talk about technology companies, like oftentimes we're talking about startups, and startups just are all about, let's, bang on the keyboard and get this product out as fast as we can, and don't necessarily think about, some of the security implications that may arise from trying to produce too quickly. Telco is, again, it's different. It just depends on the telcos, but telcos are tough too, because like there's a huge focus on hitting telcos from the nation state perspective, and there's a specific subset of adversaries that are highly targeting the telco side of the house, just for a number of reasons. Telcos have huge amounts of data. Think about any of the businesses that are out there. How do you get internet? You get internet through a telco. So all these businesses are riding on these huge telco pipes. Surveillance is great from an espionage perspective, but also being able to pop a telco, like breach a telco, and then move laterally over to an actual intended victim is also another easy component, or easy technique. So yeah, I mean, I guess I didn't give you a clear answer there, but it just depends. It's pretty different depending on the organization.
Scott, I want to highlight something which basically we've not talked about a lot in this show, which you highlighted: the threat of espionage and cybersecurity. Now, tell us about this and give us some insights into what's happening across the region.
So I mean, espionage has always been a big thing, but I mean, like let's take a look at the region, right? This is a pretty big powerhouse in terms of intellectual property across Asia Pacific, right? Lot of very valuable intellectual property that can be stolen, and you know what better way to gain the upper hand in a particular industry than to just steal data that somebody else has spent, tens, maybe hundreds of millions of dollars on researching, and or maybe, years, decades, whatever, right? So espionage is great from, that perspective, in the sense that it helps whatever government gain, like, quick advantages, make huge leaps in different industries that are of importance to the government, right? And so that's something I think a lot of people don't really think about, because you're always reading about e-crime. You're always reading about this ransomware attack or that extortion attack, and we definitely need to get the word out about that. But espionage, and in particular organizations that hold a lot of very valuable intellectual property, are ripe targets for espionage. And we definitely need to make sure that there's people understanding that if your organization holds valuable intellectual property, then there's probably two nations right here within this region that are very focused on targeting for espionage purposes, for that
And who are
stealing of
these
intellectual
nations?
property theft. So China, without a doubt, the most active nation state on the planet in terms of volume of activity, And that's what they do, right? They target organizations that are holding intellectual property that kind of maps to their various 5-year plans, and they will steal as much data as they possibly can, and then that helps them make huge leaps in manufacturing of the whatever kind of matches those industries, or helps them make huge leaps in and strides in becoming better at whatever they're trying to achieve. So like one of the areas that they focused on is like trying to build a better domestic healthcare capabilities, right? So stealing intellectual property related to the healthcare industry was a big one, and continues to be a big one. I think we're all, well, maybe we're not all, maybe I'm just like so deeply involved in this, so that's why I'm saying we're all. So maybe that's probably not the right way to preface this, but they made some major strides in aircraft development as a result of stealing a huge volume of intellectual property. So China on the one hand, DPRK on the other hand. So it's very similar reasons. They have what they call the National Economic Development Strategy, which basically is not too dissimilar from the China 5-year plans, and that also outlines growth areas for their domestic capabilities that ultimately, are there to keep the Kim regime in power, and they will go out and do espionage, intellectual property theft for that as well. That's not like their main targeting, like primarily going back to the earlier conversation. They're that number 3 piece. They're that nexus between e-crime and nation state, going out trying to generate currency, but they're not like an e-crime group. They're actually nation state who's doing like e-crime type stuff.
Now, I want to come back to e-crime again, and I want to highlight the threat hunting report, which you identified a significant increase in adversaries using legit remote IT management applications to hide in the enterprise environment. Tell us about that, and what can businesses do to protect themselves against clandestine infiltrations like these?
Yeah, this is a big one, right? Because the reason why it's such a popular technique now is because, if you're using tools that the administrators on the network use, if you're using tools that are built into the operating system, then it's very easy to blend in and look like it's legitimate behavior when in fact it's actually nefarious behavior, right? So it's a popular technique because if we think about this from like, just a technological perspective, think about your endpoint, my endpoint. I mean, I'm using a Mac here. There's probably Dells and HPs and a whole host of different types of endpoints in the various businesses across the region, and there's security software running on probably I'd love to be able to say 100%, but probably not a vast majority of them. And if you're using malware, it's generally speaking going to get detected by the security tools. But if you're using tools that are built into the operating system, or if you're using tools that the administrators use to do remote administration, or if the help desk uses a tool to try and remote into your computer to help you fix a problem with Outlook or whatever, well, the security software has no clue if that's actually a help desk employee, or is it an e-crime adversary who's perpetrating as the help desk, or more importantly, is it just an e-crime adversary who's using that to move around the network and move around it undetected and, quote unquote, as we said, blend in with the rest of the network traffic. So it's quite dangerous. Now, to answer the second part of your question, what can be done? You got to supplement the technology with human eyes. Like, technology is only going to get you so far. So you need to have threat hunting. You need to do some form of threat hunting, whether that's a managed threat hunting capability, whether it's doing threat hunting on site with your own personnel, whether it's a combination of the two. The point being that you need to have human eyes on this. And then also, I would generally say this is obvious, but maybe it's not. You also need to make sure that you're using basically what would amount to next gen security software. You cannot be using legacy software because you're already at a disadvantage. And then with these kind of techniques, it puts you at an even bigger disadvantage.
And on that sobering note, thank you very much, Scott, for that insight, for your insights. But before we leave, really, any final thoughts you'd like to leave the audience with in terms of maybe what they should be doing to protect themselves?
I mean, I think that last thought, make sure that you're using current technology, the legacy technology that you've been, potentially, bought into for years, decades, whatever. It's time to move on to something that's better. Like you got to, move into the modern day. Like your Pentium processors from the 90s are not going to run, today's, Windows. What are we up to? Windows 12 these days? Windows 13? I don't know what it is. Um, no, I mean, those older processors are not going to run current modern operating systems. Similarly, modern operating systems require modern security software. So that's, I think, the first thing. Second thing is practice makes perfect. If you're in an organization, make sure that you're drilling, make sure that you're practicing your response techniques. The worst time to practice is when you get hit with an actual ransomware attack. Practice before the attack, so that way it's muscle memory and you know what to do. And then last thing I personally would always recommend is make sure you're across some form of threat intelligence, so that way you know who your adversaries are that are likely targeting you, and that you're putting in the right security controls to counteract those adversaries.
Two key takeaways for me from that, really: threat intelligence and practice. Scott, thank you very much for taking your time to be on the show.
Thank you so very much for having me. I appreciate it.
Now, we've been speaking to Scott Jarkoff. He's the Director of Intelligence Strategy, APJ, and Meta at CrowdStrike. I'm Brian Fernandez, and you've been watching and listening to BizTech's APAC Cybersecurity Show. Catch the conversation and more on www.biztech.asia, as well as our syndication partners, TV stations, radio stations, and websites. Thanks a lot for tuning in.